This presentation looks at the possibility of using books in a primary classroom to teach specific English language features. The goal is to identify two different language features that are taught in the Australian curriculum for Year 6. This presentation will discuss 4 different teaching strategies to teach said language features using current children's literature as a foundation. The first language feature that we will be examining relates to text structure and organization. The content descriptor reads, "Understand that cohesive links can be made in texts by omitting or replacing words." The first book we will be looking at is called If Sharks Disappeared and was written by Lily Williams in 2017. In the elaborations of the before-mentioned content descriptor, we can see that there is a focus on observing how relationships between concepts can be represented visually, and looking at cause and effect figures as well as visual continuities. A suitable teaching strategy would be a collaborative books. This guided writing activity is a fun way for students to be introduced to making their own books. In small groups, students can create a different version of the story. The focus of this exercise is for students to find cause and effect processes they are familiar with or have heard of. Working in small groups, the students can choose a topic they are interested in. The teacher would examine pages in the book where cause and effect relationships are depicted and discuss these with the whole class. He or she would then go on to model an example with a different process. After that, students independently research and design their pages. Once everyone has a rough idea, it is important to have a segment of peer revision to check for understanding and to make sure everyone is on track. At the end, each group creates a final version of their page, which the teacher can then bind in a collective book for everyone. The first visualization of cause and effect relations that students could model their work after is visual continuity. Williams includes a timeline of evolution with the focus on sharks in her book, which you can see depicted here. When students are creating their own timeline, there is a fantastic possibility to connect English with HASS. The Australian curriculum for grade 6 in HASS requires students to sequence information about events and the lives of individuals in chronological order and represent time by creating timelines. This ties in beautifully with creating a collaborative book using visual continuities, giving the students a foundation for possible topics they can depict. The other visualization of relations are cause and effect figures. These create connections between beings or things and show what happens when factors are altered. Again, this activity lends itself to connecting with other areas of the curriculum, especially HASS and the cross-curricular priority of sustainability. Possible topics would be the effect technological developments have had on society or the effect of overfishing on marine life. This teaching strategy of collaborative books provides space for differentiation. To extend students, 2 groups could work together to describe a more complex network of cause and effect relations. To simplify the task, the teacher could provide students with a topic and relevant information that is required. Providing a layout would also provide more scaffolding for those who need it. When looking at the 4 resource model, it is important to note that this book is especially good in terms of code breaking. Because it is a picture book, it provides the reader with a visual aid while discussing complex cause and effect models. The book urges the text users to be more conscious consumers, which in turn is explored when students create their collaborative book with other relevant topics regarding sustainability. In terms of meaning making, the book makes the links between the ecosystems very clear and helps readers understand what happens when delicate systems are brought out of equilibrium. The cueing systems students would use when working with this book in terms of semantics would mainly be the pictures. In terms of syntactics, students would be able to connect to familiar phrases such as, "If you don't clean up your room, then you will be grounded," which is a very simple cause and effect reaction. The second book we will be looking at to teach about cohesive links is the novel Wander. This was written by Palacio in 2012. The elaborations in the curriculum state that the students need to learn about how cohesion can be developed through repeating key words or by using synonyms or antonyms. In order to teach about cohesive links, teachers need to know that there are words or phrases that show relationships between paragraphs or sections of text. There are 5 different types of cohesive links. Reference, which is when we refer back to someone or something that has already been mentioned. Substitution, which is replacing a word or phrase to prevent repetition. Ellipsis, which is omitting a word or phrase. Conjunction, which is connecting a clause or sentences. And last but not least, lexical items, which is using synonyms to replace words. A suitable teaching strategy to teach grade 6 students about cohesive links would be a jigsaw activity. During this guided reading activity, students would work in groups of 5. Each student would become an expert in one of the cohesive links. This would mean researching the link and then finding examples in the chapter they are currently reading. Once students have completed this task, they would go back into their original groups and present their findings to their peers. The teacher could collect the students' notes and use them as a piece of formative assessment. An example how this could work for substitution would look like this. Students would analyze the section of text they are currently reading and highlight relevant examples. They could then use a graphic organizer to write down their own findings. Here we can see Mr. Tushman, Miss Rubin, and Miss Summer being replaced by they, or letter being replaced by one and it. In terms of differentiation, teachers using the strategy could extend students by asking them to compare and contrast different cohesive links and how frequently they appear. They could also get the students to come up with their own examples. To simplify the strategy, teachers could provide the definition of the relevant cohesive links with examples. Looking back at the 4-resource model again, the simple language used in this book allows the readers to identify repetition and cohesive links on a code-breaking level. The text users can easily relate to the book and the expressions used. Since it is written from the perspective of a 5th grader, in terms of meaning making, the students can look at the techniques the author uses to create flow and compare these with how they speak themselves. In terms of the cueing systems, students will be focusing on familiar language on a syntactic level. Students would be using cohesive links intuitively in their day-to-day life. An example for this would be interchanging the words togs with swimwear or bathing suit. Because the use is subconscious in spoken language, the book Wonder is a fantastic resource. It is written predominantly in a way that people would speak, making it easily accessible and engaging. The second language feature we will be looking at is related to expressing and developing ideas. The content descriptor in the Australian curriculum reads, investigate how complex sentences can be used in a variety of ways to elaborate, extend, and explain ideas. First up, we will again be looking at William's book, If Sharks Disappeared, and how we can use this as a foundation to teach students about complex sentences and the conjunctions that exist that allow us to construct these. Again, in order to teach this, it is important to know that a complex sentence always has one independent clause and a minimum of one dependent clause, and that conjunctions are words that conjoin different words, phrases, clauses, or sentences. Example of these would be but, and, yet, or, because, etc. A suitable teaching strategy would be working with cut-up sentences and integrating a word wall. This is a guided reading activity that clarifies how complex sentences are created. For this teaching strategy, teachers need to print sentences from the book and cut them into fragments of independent and dependent clauses. Students are then required to independently work, arranging the fragments logically and highlighting the joining words. At the end, there's a possibility for the whole class to contribute their findings and to add the conjunctions to a big word wall. This ensures that every student is aware of all conjunctions and nobody is left behind. An example from the book would look like this. The sentence is cut up into sharks are apex predators, which means they are at the top of the food chain in the ecosystem, the ocean. Students would arrange the sentence so that it makes sense and highlight the word which. In a whole group activity, the students could add the conjunction they found to the word wall. An example of this is shown on the right. This teaching strategy is fantastic for creating differentiated activities. To extend the students, the teacher can cut the sentences into smaller fragments, splitting the clauses. We can see this at the top here. To simplify the task, the teacher can give the students larger fragments that are color-coded for independent and dependent clause. We can see an example for this at the bottom. Looking at the 4-resource model, in relation to learning about conjunctions, it is clear that in terms of code breaking, students would heavily rely on the punctuation. This is a great indicator to show where complex sentences are split into dependent and independent clause. As text users, students would be able to analyze and process all the information that is available in this book by breaking it down into smaller fragments during this activity. This would then lead to the students becoming more informed and aware of the importance of keeping our ecosystems balanced. Last but not least, we will look at the cueing systems students would use during this learning process. What stands out here is that on a syntactic level, students would probably be able to use their knowledge of intonation to help give insight into punctuation. On a graphophonic level, the students would be able to use punctuation as an indicator, where what segment goes in the sequence. Full stops indicate the end, while capital letters are mostly at the beginning of a sentence. With that, we are back to our language feature of expressing and developing ideas. The second book, Wonder, could also be used to teach about the choice of conjunctions. Important for this teaching strategy is to know that there are 3 types of conjunctions. The first being coordinating conjunctions, which join sentence elements that are the same. The second type are subordinating conjunctions, which join dependent clauses to independent clauses. And the third type are correlating conjunctions, which are the same as coordinating conjunctions, except that they are always used in pairs. A suitable teaching strategy would be doing a word sort. For this, the teacher needs to compile a list of words that appear in the current chapter of the book. The teacher needs to then explain the different categories for sorting, i.e., what a coordinating conjunction, what a subordinating conjunction is, and what a correlative conjunction is. The students go on to examining the words and categorizing them. They can explore what words are reoccurring and what patterns can be discovered. An example from the book is shown here. This is only a very small segment from which the teacher can create 3 cards of words that need to be sorted. The students can use the context to help them decide what type of conjunction it is and to sort accordingly. In terms of differentiation, this activity can easily be changed from an open to a closed sort and vice versa. To extend students, the open sort variation can be used, which means that the categories are not given, but that the students explore the relations themselves and develop their own explanations and rules. For students who need a little bit more assistance, the categories can be provided by the teacher, making it a closed sort activity. When looking at the 4 resource model, the short and simple sentences and paragraphs help the reader in terms of code breaking. This particular teaching strategy of sorting words draws focus on creating grammatically correct and sensible sentences, which in turn then helps the reader when making meaning. The cueing system that students would most heavily rely on during this learning segment would be syntactic. The focus would be on specific language features of conjunctions and how these are used. As we can see, books are a fabulous and versatile resource that should be incorporated not only into the English classroom, but throughout all subjects and grade levels. Thank you so much for listening.